Colorado Territory, 1873. The frigid mountain air cut like a knife through the thin walls of Loretta Stanton's cabin as she watched the stranger stagger toward her porch. Her heart quickened. Strangers meant trouble in this isolated valley, 40 miles from the nearest town. The young man collapsed before reaching her door, a crimson stain spreading across his side where he clutched weakly. At 22, Loretta had already learned what most frontier women knew: trust was a luxury, especially for a woman alone. Her father's final words before consumption took him last winter still echoed in her mind. The West devours the weak, stand alone and stand strong. This solitary existence was safer, she reminded herself as she reluctantly dragged the wounded stranger inside. Loretta's honey-blonde hair fell from its practical bun as she struggled with his weight. She noted his lean but strong build, the quality of his worn clothing, and the absence of the hardened look most drifters carried. Despite his pallor, she could see he was handsome, perhaps 25, with strong features softened by youth. "Water," he rasped, revealing striking blue eyes as they fluttered open. "Lie still," Loretta commanded, her voice steadier than her hands as she cut away his bloodied shirt. The bullet had grazed his ribs, leaving an angry furrow that, while painful, wouldn't kill him if infection didn't set in. "You're fortunate, Cowboy. Another inch and we wouldn't be having this conversation." 3 days later, Zachary Zimmerman sat propped against Loretta's kitchen wall, watching her tend to her modest garden through the window. The fever had broken, leaving him weak but clear-headed enough to appreciate his savior's quiet beauty. When she returned with fresh vegetables, her cheeks flushed from exertion, her simple blue cotton dress highlighting eyes the color of mountain lakes, he found himself unexpectedly speechless. "You have a name, Cowboy, or should I keep calling you Mr. Bleeding all over my floor?" she asked, the hint of a smile softening her words. "Zachary Zimmerman, Miss most call me Zach," he winced as he shifted. "I owe you my life." "You owe me a new shirt and 3 days of chores once you're healed," she countered practically. "And it's Miss Stanton." Loretta Stanton. That evening, as Loretta mended his tattered shirt by lamplight, Zach watched her deft fingers work the needle through the fabric. Her solitude puzzled him. Most unmarried women didn't homestead alone, especially one as young and beautiful as she was. "Where's your family?" he finally asked. "Gone," her fingers never paused. "Father passed last winter, mother years before that. The land is mine now. No husband, brothers." Her eyes flashed dangerously. "I manage fine alone, Mr. Zimmerman." "I meant no disrespect, Miss Stanton. Just seems a hard life for anyone alone, man or woman." "The alternative is worse," she said cryptically, returning to her mending. Zach knew that tone. He'd heard it from men who'd seen too much death, from women who'd suffered at cruel hands. Whatever had happened, it had taught her that isolation was safety, a lesson he understood all too well. "Those men," he said carefully, "the ones who shot me, they were Jasper Pike's gang. I was hired to track them after they robbed a bank in Denver." Loretta's needle stilled. "You're a lawman." "Bounty hunter," he watched her stiffen. "But I'm thinking of giving it up. Too many bullets, too few friends, makes for a lonely trail." "A woman like you deserves better," the cowboy whispered as she mended his tattered shirt. "Than to be alone out here, with the likes of Pike's gang roaming these mountains." Loretta's fingers trembled slightly. "I've made my choice, Mr. Zimmerman. Loneliness doesn't steal your dignity or break your bones." She tied off her thread with a decisive snap. Her words revealed more than she intended, and in that moment, Zach understood what she feared more than solitude. The knowledge sat heavily in his chest. "Some men are wolves," he agreed quietly, "but not all of us." Their eyes met across the dim room, a moment of recognition passing between two souls who'd chosen isolation over risk, survival over connection. The tension broke when a distant wolf howled, reminding them of the wilderness surrounding them. "Pike's men will come looking," he warned. "I wounded one of them before they got me." "Let them," she replied, reaching for the shotgun resting against the wall. "This land has taught me patience and accuracy." By the time April snow gave way to May's wildflowers, Zach's wound had healed enough for him to help with the heavy chores. They fell into an uneasy rhythm, he repairing her leaking roof and broken fences, she tolerating his presence with decreasing wariness. At night he slept in the small barn, respecting her boundaries while remaining close enough to protect her if Pike's men returned. One evening, as they shared a simple supper of rabbit stew, Zach mentioned needing to leave soon. "You haven't fully healed," Loretta protested too quickly, then composed herself. "The journey could reopen your wound." "Is that concern I hear, Miss Stanton?" he teased gently. "Practical assessment," she countered, but her eyes betrayed her. Something had shifted between them, fragile as spring ice but undeniably present. The next morning, Loretta found Zach examining her father's old saddle in the barn. "He was a cavalryman," she explained, surprising herself by sharing this piece of her past. "Fought with the Union, taught me to ride and shoot before I could properly read." "A good father," Zach observed. "The best," her voice softened with memory. "After the war, something in him broke. He brought us west, said the mountains would heal what doctors couldn't. When my mother died of fever that first winter, he retreated further into himself." "And you stayed even after he passed." "This land is mine," she said simply. "Bought with years of hardship, I won't surrender it." Zach stepped closer. "And what about joy, Loretta? Did you surrender that too?" Before she could answer, hoofbeats thundered in the distance. Through the barn door they spotted 3 riders approaching, rough-looking men with rifles. "Pike's men," Zach hissed, reaching for his gun. "Get to the house." "Not without you," she insisted, already moving toward the cabin's relative safety. They barely made it inside before bullets splintered the doorframe. Loretta grabbed her shotgun while Zach positioned himself at the window. "Zimmerman," a harsh voice called out, "we know you're in there, the woman too." "What do they want with me?" Loretta whispered, her face pale. "Nothing good," Zach replied grimly. "These aren't men who leave witnesses." For hours they exchanged sporadic gunfire with the outlaws. As dusk approached, Zach noticed Loretta's hands trembling. "You've done this before," he realized. "Defended this place." She nodded tersely. 2 years ago, drifters. They thought a woman alone would be easy pickings." "What happened?" Her eyes hardened. "I buried them behind the apple trees." Zach felt a swell of admiration mixed with sadness. No wonder she'd chosen isolation. The world had taught her terrible lessons about men and violence. As night fell, one of the outlaws crept toward the barn and set it ablaze. The distraction nearly worked. A bullet grazed Zach's arm as he fired at the arsonist. By midnight, with the barn reduced to embers and ammunition running low, they were trapped. "There's a hidden cellar," Loretta whispered, "under the bearskin rug. If you can make it to the ravine beyond the north pasture, there's a trail to Silverton." "I'm not leaving you," he said firmly. "Don't be a fool," she hissed. "One of us needs to bring help." "These men won't leave you alive, Loretta." He gripped her shoulders. "And I won't leave you to face that alone." In the pre-dawn darkness, as they prepared for what might be their last stand, Zach confessed what had brought him to this life of hunting dangerous men. "My sister was 16 when 3 men raided our Texas farm. I was away, working cattle drives to pay off my father's debts. When I returned," his voice broke. "I've spent 5 years tracking the kind of men who did that. Thought it might fill the hole inside. It never has." Loretta's hand found his in the darkness. "So you understand why you choose to be alone?" "Yes," he squeezed her fingers. "But Loretta, there's something I've learned that you haven't yet." "What's that?" "That surviving isn't the same as living." The confession hung between them as dawn broke across the valley. With it came an unexpected sound, horsemen, many of them, approaching from the east. Pike's men heard it too and began firing wildly as a posse from Silverton thundered into the clearing, led by the county sheriff. In the chaos that followed, one of Pike's men broke through toward the cabin. Loretta fired, hitting him in the shoulder, but he kept coming. Zach tackled him before he reached her, and they grappled desperately on the floor. The outlaw drew a knife, slashing at Zach's chest, but Loretta brought her shotgun down on his head with decisive force. When the dust settled, Pike's men were either dead or in custody. The sheriff explained that they'd been tracking the gang for weeks after a string of robberies and murders. Zach's earlier confrontation with them had helped narrow the search. As the posse departed with their prisoners, Loretta surveyed the damage to her home: broken windows, bullet-riddled walls, her barn a smoldering ruin. Years of work destroyed in a night. "I can't stay here," she whispered, the realization cracking something within her. Her fortress of solitude, her hard-won independence, it suddenly felt hollow. That evening, as they sat on her damaged porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Zach broke the contemplative silence. "Come with me to Denver," he said quietly. "Just until you decide what you want." "And what would I do in Denver?" Her voice carried a weariness deeper than physical exhaustion. "Live, Loretta, not just survive." He took her hand gently. "You once told me you made your choice. I'm asking you to make a different one." "I don't know how to trust anymore," she admitted, vulnerability showing through her careful armor for the first time. "Or if I ever did." "We'll learn together." His eyes held no demand, only possibility. "I'm hanging up my guns, thought I might try ranching. Always had a way with horses." "Ranching requires land," she said carefully. "I know a beautiful valley in Colorado Territory," he replied with a smile. "Bit of work needed on the barn, though." June brought warm rains and renewal to the valley. Loretta stood in the doorway of her newly rebuilt barn, watching Zach gentle a spirited mare they'd purchased in Denver. His patience with the animal revealed the man beneath the bounty hunter's exterior: steady, kind, willing to earn trust rather than demand it. Their return from Denver 3 weeks earlier had marked the beginning of a transformation. The cabin now boasted new windows and a sturdy front door. Vegetables thrived in the expanded garden, and the foundation for a proper house had been staked out beside the cabin. The changes within Loretta were less visible but more profound. The wall she'd built around herself hadn't fallen completely. They still maintained separate sleeping quarters, him in the barn loft, her in the cabin. But the distance between them diminished daily through small gestures. Shared meals, brushed fingers when passing tools, conversations that stretched into the night. "Sheriff's wife invited us to their Independence Day gathering," Zach mentioned one evening as they finished supper. "Whole town will be there." Loretta tensed. She hadn't been to a social gathering in years. "I wouldn't know how to act." "Just be yourself," he suggested. "The woman who saved my life and helped capture Pike's gang is someone worth knowing." The holiday celebration in Silverton was a revelation. Instead of suspicion, Loretta found curiosity and respect from the townspeople. Women invited her to sewing circles, the general store owner offered credit, the blacksmith's wife pressed a jar of peach preserves into her hands. Community, something she'd forgotten existed. As fireworks exploded overhead, Zach's hand found hers in the darkness. "See, the world isn't only teeth and claws." The next morning, an unexpected visitor arrived at their homestead, a lawyer from Denver with papers regarding the bounties on Pike's gang. $500 is your share, Mr. Zimmerman, the lawyer explained. The reward for information leading to their capture. That evening, Zach placed the money on the kitchen table before Loretta. "For the barn, and whatever else you need." "This is your money," she protested, "your reward." "I wouldn't be alive to collect it if not for you." His eyes held her steadily. "Partners share, Loretta." The word hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond business arrangements. Partners, not owner and hired hand, not reluctant hostess and recovering patient. Partners. August brought brutal heat and the crisis that would change everything. While Zach was in town purchasing supplies, 3 men, not outlaws but something perhaps more dangerous, arrived at the homestead. Their leader, a slick-haired man in an expensive suit, introduced himself as Harmon Whitney of the Colorado Mining Consortium. "Miss Stanton," he began smoothly, "our surveyors have discovered significant silver deposits in this valley. I'm prepared to offer $5,000 for your land, 10 times what it's worth for farming." "This land isn't for sale," Loretta replied firmly. Whitney's pleasant facade cracked slightly. "Perhaps you should consult with your husband before declining such a generous offer." "Mr. Zimmerman is my partner, not my husband," she corrected, "and my answer would be the same regardless." "I see." Whitney's tone cooled. "Well, I should inform you that we've already purchased the surrounding properties. Your water rights are now in question, as the creek's headwaters lie on our land." "That's impossible. My father secured those rights legally." "Papers get lost," Whitney said with false sympathy. "Records burn, particularly in these unsettled territories." After they departed, Loretta sank onto the porch steps, shaking with fury and fear. Without water rights, the homestead was worthless. When Zach returned and heard what had happened, his expression darkened. "Whitney has a reputation," he said grimly. "His consortium gets what it wants, one way or another." "This is what I feared," Loretta whispered. "Not outlaws or wolves, but men in suits with papers and lawyers who take what isn't theirs." "We'll fight them," Zach promised, though his voice lacked conviction. Taking on wealthy mining interests was nearly impossible for small homesteaders. The following weeks brought escalating pressure. Their creek was dammed upstream, reducing their water to a trickle. Anonymous threatening notes appeared nailed to their fence posts. When Zach confronted Whitney in Silverton, he returned with a bloody lip and the news that the sheriff was firmly in the consortium's pocket. "We could sell," Loretta suggested one night, her voice hollow. "Take the money and start somewhere new." "Is that what you want?" Zach asked carefully. She looked around the cabin, at the quilt her mother had made, the rifle her father had taught her to shoot, the walls that had sheltered her through years of solitude and recent happiness. "No," she admitted, "but I don't see another way." That night, alone in her cabin while Zach kept watch from the barn, Loretta finally confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. Her fear of vulnerability, her belief that isolation meant safety, these weren't protecting her anymore. They were prisons. And in that moment of clarity, she understood that her father's final advice had been born of his own brokenness, not wisdom. Standing wasn't the same as standing alone. At dawn, she walked to the barn and found Zach asleep in the hay, his gun beside him. Gently, she touched his shoulder. "I know what we need to do," she said when he awakened. "And I need to tell you something first." She told him everything then, about the traveling salesman who'd come to their farm when her father was ill, how he'd seemed kind until he wasn't, how she'd fought him off with her father's cavalry saber, and how the shame and fear had convinced her that solitude was the only safety. "That's why I chose to be alone," she finished. "But I don't want that choice anymore, not if it means losing this land." "Not if it means losing you." Zach listened in silence, then carefully took her hands in his. "I've never wanted to push you. I figured when you were ready." "I'm ready now," she whispered, "ready to fight for what's ours." Together. Their plan unfolded over the next 2 weeks. While Whitney's men watched the homestead, Zach slipped away to Denver, carrying documents and letters. Loretta visited neighbors, sharing her story and Whitney's threats. Some turned her away, afraid of repercussions. Others listened. When Whitney arrived with armed men and eviction papers, he found not just Loretta and Zach waiting, but 20 neighboring homesteaders, the editor of the Denver Chronicle, and a federal marshal. "Mr. Whitney," the marshal announced, "I have a warrant regarding allegations of fraudulent land claims and tampering with water rights documents." The editor stepped forward. "And I have a rather interesting story about corruption and intimidation for tomorrow's front page." Whitney's face contorted with rage. "This is absurd. I have legitimate business interests." "And we have witnesses," Zach interrupted. "Former employees of yours with fascinating tales about falsified records and bribes to local officials." The confrontation ended with Whitney in custody, and his consortium's claims under federal investigation. As the neighbors celebrated around a bonfire that night, Loretta found herself surrounded by community for the first time in years. The isolation that had defined her existence was dissolving, replaced by connections she'd never thought possible. Later, as the guests departed, Zach found Loretta by the creek, now flowing freely again after the marshal had ordered Whitney's dam destroyed. "Your father would be proud," Zach said, standing beside her. "You didn't just save your land, you helped save everyone's." "I think he would be," she agreed, "though not as proud as I am of us." Zach smiled at the word, us. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," she turned to face him fully, "which is why I think we should make it official." His expression shifted to confusion, then dawning hope. "Loretta, are you asking?" "Yes," she took his hands. "Not because I need protection, or because I'm afraid to be alone anymore. But because I want to build something with you, something neither of us could create alone." October painted the aspens gold on the day they married in Silverton's small church. The town turned out in force, no longer strangers but neighbors and friends. Loretta wore a simple cream dress with her mother's lace shawl, her honey-blonde hair crowned with wildflowers. Zach, in a new suit that couldn't quite disguise the cowboy underneath, watched her approach with wonder in his eyes. Their vows were straightforward, promises of partnership, respect, and love built on the foundation of hard-won trust. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the congregation seemed to echo across the valley they now shared. The following spring, their new house stood complete beside the original cabin, which they converted into a guest house for visitors from Denver and beyond. The barn housed not just horses but Zach's growing breeding operation, his knowledge of horseflesh proving as valuable as Loretta's skill with crops and medicines. Word of Zimmerman Station spread throughout the territory, a place where travelers could find fair prices, honest dealings, and perhaps the best apple pie in Colorado, courtesy of Loretta's expanding orchard. On their first anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset turn the mountains to fire, Zach placed a small wooden box in Loretta's lap. "What's this?" she asked, opening it to find a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a mountain range. "Something to remind you," he said, "that mountains can be climbed, that what looks impassable rarely is with the right partner." Loretta touched the brooch gently, then looked up at the man who had helped her see that vulnerability wasn't weakness but courage of a different kind. "I have something for you too," she said, placing his hand on her stomach with a smile that held all their tomorrows, "though it won't arrive for about 7 more months." Zach's expression transformed from confusion to joy as understanding dawned. He gathered her into his arms, their shared laughter rising into the evening air, the sound of two people who had found in each other not just love, but home. The cabin that had once stood as Loretta's fortress of solitude now formed the heart of something greater. A future built on the certainty that some risks were worth taking, that true strength came not from standing alone but from standing together, and that even in the harshest wilderness, love could not just survive but flourish.